So the first thing I want to start with is I want to get to know you and how you got to this point in your life. So describe to me, who was John Suthers the child? What kind of kid were you?
Well, I had an interesting story even as a child. I was born out of wedlock to a 26-year-old woman from Cincinnati who was sent by her family out to Denver to have the baby, and that's what you did at the time, right? 1951, you sent your pregnant daughter off to some distant city. She worked as an editor at a newspaper while she was pregnant, and I was born at Mercy Hospital in Denver, and I was adopted 3 weeks later by a couple from Colorado Springs. My adoptive parents had come to, my father had been stationed at Fort Carson. He enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, got sent to what was called Camp Carson at the time. So he calls my mother and says, "This is the most beautiful place I've ever been. You need to come check it out." And they made a deal that if he survived the war, they moved to Colorado Springs. They did in 1946. They adopted me in 1951. And I had an incredibly loving childhood. They were fantastic people. Unfortunately, they died when I was pretty young. My father died when I was 15 of a heart attack. It was the most traumatic event of my entire life, and in hindsight, I think it had an incredible impact on the course of my life. My mother died 6 years later when I was just graduating from college.
Now, experiencing a loss at such a young age, that can serve as a major fork in the road. You can kind of go one of two directions. How did that impact your direction in life?
I chose the route of becoming very determined. I was under a lot of pressure. I had to make the dean's list every semester to keep the scholarship, so I was a nerd. You know, I had my little space at the library, and I was there till midnight every night and Saturday mornings before football games and all that sort of thing. But it paid off. I graduated magna cum laude and got a scholarship at the University of Colorado Law School. I'd gotten into some other law schools, including Georgetown, but I knew I wanted to live in Colorado, wanted to come back to Colorado Springs, so it was a good situation for me to go to the University of Colorado Law School.
That's amazing. What was your first big job that you landed after you graduated?
After I graduated from law school, I started as a deputy district attorney here in Colorado Springs. And I got assigned to a couple of pretty significant cases that has turned out to do all the legal research. And we got a couple weeks before trial, and the individual that had committed this crime escaped from the county courthouse, unfortunately went to Florida and murdered 3 co-eds at Florida State University. So my first big case as a young intern was Ted Bundy, who was a serial killer and of course became famous over time, eventually executed for those murders. But it was those cases and the feeling the impact, vindicating the interests of society and the victims in the case that made me decide I want to spend a lot of my career as a prosecutor.
How did you make the leap from being a prosecutor to then finding yourself in the mayoral office?
I started out, I was a deputy and chief deputy district attorney for 4 years, went into private practice. I had this feeling, you got to prove yourself that you can make it in private practice. Colorado Springs had gone to a strong mayor form of government in 2011. Mm-hmm. The voters, I think, had decided that we'd outgrown a council manager form of government. We weren't responding to things very quickly. We had a huge infrastructure problem. So they went to strong mayor. The first strong mayor, Steve Bach, smart guy, loved the community, but wasn't the most diplomatic guy in the world. And so a lot of business people started saying, "Hey, John, why don't you forego making a decent living for yet more years? And any time you throw your hat in the ring, there's a danger you might win." And that's what happened. I got elected mayor in 2015, and it's probably made it the most satisfying job I've had.
So changing topics a little bit. So you've been applauded and credited for backing major infrastructure, supporting local fire police departments, reviving downtown, to name just a few. But in your eyes, what is the biggest accomplishment? What is something you're most proud of?
I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to communicate effectively with the citizens and say, look, we need to invest in critical public infrastructure. You know the roads are bad. I'm telling you, our stormwater system's also legally and physically deficient. We need to fix it. And by the way, if we show this kind of investment in our community, other people are going to invest in the community. Companies are going to come here, companies are going to expand here, and that's happened.
Definitely. Now, Colorado Springs has been in the news a lot recently, it seems like, for some pretty horrific events. So that suggests that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the city. What are some of the biggest challenges that we need to address as a city?
Well, when you're talking about some of the traumatic things, actually, most of the work there needs to be done by the state, in my opinion. Make no mistake about it, we've got a good police department. Our crime problems are largely driven by legislation, in my opinion. We had three traumatic criminal episodes during my time as mayor. Terrible events, and my job, a whole different kind of leadership. I was to be the consoler in chief, spokesman for the community, and make sure that Colorado Springs was defined by their reaction to those events and not by the events themselves. I thought we did a great job. I was very proud of the community, the way it stepped up financially and otherwise after Club Q, after Planned Parenthood, and I think we sent an appropriate message to the rest of the country.
Okay. What is one thing that you have noticed that people just get wrong about you? That they just don't understand, a misconception perhaps?
Every bad thing they say about me is a misconception in my word. But I really do think, because I'm so serious on my TV interviews and all that kind of stuff, I take my responsibilities really seriously. I think people are really surprised when they see me in an informal setting and I have some really good jokes. Want to hear the best joke I have when my wife is there? No, this is no joke. If my wife's in the audience, I say, I am so pleased to have my wife Janet here for this speech tonight. You know, she's been my rock solid supporter all these years, and she really keeps me humble. In fact, on election night, when I got elected mayor of Colorado Springs, I looked at my wife and said, honey, in your wildest dreams, did you ever think I'd be mayor of Colorado Springs? And she looked at me and said, John, you were never in my wildest dreams. I have told that joke 100 times. Some people have heard it 4 or 5 times. They still laugh. By the way, you know where I got the joke from?
Where?
Mitt Romney. That was one of his great jokes on the circuit. So, yeah.
What is the best and the worst part of being mayor?
The worst part is some of what politics has degenerated into. I mean, there's just a lot of, I get nasty communications from people that it's kind of sad that they're so negative. They don't really appreciate people's efforts and all that kind of stuff. The best part is working with fantastic people. I've had a great team at the city. I've also, I love going out and seeing businesses in the community and things that go on in Colorado Springs that nobody has any idea what's going on. Let me give you an example. I had a tour of Schriever Air Force Base early on, and I go into a room with a bunch of 19, 20-year-old airmen, and they're running the world's GPS system right from that room, all 23 GPS satellites. So everybody in the world's dependent upon them. That's right here in Colorado Springs. That's really a really great part of being mayor.
Kind of shifting our focus to the future then, what advice do you have for whoever wins to keep this momentum going?
Stick to the basics. I think there's a temptation around the country, and I see this in some of the large cities that were famous for having a high quality of life that I think are losing it, and I would point out cities like Portland and Seattle and others. They get into things, I think cities need to concentrate on what cities ought to do. Public safety, infrastructure. There's just some things the government, particularly local government, does well, and they ought to stick to it. And they ought to concentrate on those things. People need to be safe. and they need to have good public infrastructure, be able to move around. And that's what I'm hoping the next mayor will continue to concentrate on.
And what are your hopes for the future of Colorado Springs?
I hope I end every speech that I give as mayor of Colorado Springs by exhorting the public that our challenge has always been, from the days of William Palmer, to continue to build a city that matches our scenery. As the city gets larger, that becomes more difficult, but it's still the challenge. We have to build a city that matches the incredible beauty that surrounds us. And my hope is that everybody who lives in Colorado Springs, everybody who is the leadership of Colorado Springs understands that has to be the focus. How do we continue to build a city that matches our scenery?